Good morning, afternoon, and Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sumaya, and I am the Secretary for the Board of Directors for the Organization for Islamic Learning. The organization is a charitable, non-profit, community-based group that strives to build a membership whose main goal is to understand and practice the essence of Islam in an inclusive environment. We promote learning activities based on the teachings of the Quran and the values of its prophet and his family. We hold events in hopes to enhance the spiritual and intellectual growth of our members and the community at large. This year has brought with it many challenges, as well as opportunities to grow and learn. One of these has been the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. So consequently, we are pleased to bring you an amazing panel discussion to enable us to listen, engage, and take action. We will start with introductions from our moderator, followed by a performance by Timaj. Then each member will have some time to make introductory remarks, which kicks off the panel discussion, ending with Q&A from the audience. Note that questions can be asked at any time. We encourage all of you listening to get involved and have therefore allowed questions to go through YouTube as well as the usual menti.com link. The code is 6912774. Without further delay, I would like to hand over to the moderator for the morning, Rowaida Abdelaziz. Rowaida is a national reporter at HuffPost. She spearheads the coverage of Islamophobia and reports the intersection of anti-Muslim sentiment within politics, culture, and gender. Rowaida, over to you.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, good morning, or good afternoon, or even good evening, based off of where you are joining us. Thank you all for making the conscious decision and engaging and listening to our panel. I commend you all. We have an incredible lineup of people, and I am very excited to get through a lot of the topics that we have set for you all within the next 2 hours or so. Now, a lot of these terms may be unfamiliar to you. If not, we have put out a guide. If a lot of this information is already familiar to you, we ask that you be patient, and that if you are uncomfortable in any moment of this conversation, that is a positive thing. And we are here to learn and to listen from the experts. And so without further ado, my name is Rowaida, and as Sumaya mentioned, I am a reporter at HuffPost, and I will be your host this afternoon, guiding you through a lot of the excellent topics we have today. Now, to get started, I have the honor of introducing our panelists without in any particular order. I will begin with Akila Hanif Jabari. Akila Hanif Jabari is an anti-racism advisor, consultant, and trainer at the Jabari Community Services. She is an educator who designs and facilitates anti-racism and anti-Black racism workshops and presentations for institutions and groups across Canada. She has been a community anti-racism advocate in the areas of policing, justice, child welfare, and education for over 3 decades. She's graduated with a philosophy degree from McMaster University and then went on to work in government, serving the needs of marginalized communities. She went on to graduate with honors from Seneca College in adult education and staff training, and then graduated with a bachelor's degree in social work. She's focused on race issues while completing her master's degree in social work on full scholarship. Akila has also worked with Provincial Anti-Racism Directorate within the Ontario, Human Rights Commission. She contends that racism is in the air and in the water, and it operates as a backdrop to our society in such a way to be default, normalized, and rendered invisible to many. So thank you so much, Akila, for being here with us today. Next, we have Yasmin Abdelmajid, who is a Sudanese-Australian writer, broadcaster, and award-winning social advocate with a background in mechanical engineering. It's always my favorite tidbit about you, Yasmin. One of the 2020 LinkedIn changemakers, Yasmin is a globally sought-after advisor on issues of social justice focused on race, gender, and faith. She has traveled to 24 countries, delivering keynotes on inclusive leadership, tackling unconscious bias, and achieving substantive change. Yasmin's internationally acclaimed TED Talk, What Does My Headscarf Mean to You?, has been viewed over 2 million times and was chosen as one of TED's top 10 ideas of 2015. Yasmin has published a memoir and 2 fiction novels with Penguin Random House. and has a number of screenwriting projects in development. Her social and current affairs commentary has appeared in Time, The Guardian, Vogue, and is a regular on BBC, Al Jazeera, and TRT. In all of her work, Yasmin is an advocate for transformative justice and a fairer and safer world for all. Thank you so much, Yasmin, for being here. Welcome. And last and not least, we have Timaj Garad, who is an Ethiopian, Harari Toronto-based multidisciplinary storyteller, arts educator, and community organizer who uses poetry, theater, and music to bring her stories to life. Her art is autobiographical, working at the intersections of a Black Muslim woman challenging injustice, unearthing truths, and healing. As an award-winning artist and educator, she has graced over 300 stages and facilitated several arts-based workshops, and is the founder of Luminous Fest, Canada's first Black arts festival, and the co-founder of the Sisters Retreat, a retreat series hosting local and international arts-based wellness retreat for Muslim women. She's currently living in Toronto and working on her debut EP, Blooming at the Mouth, to be released in early 2021. And she believes in the transformative power of the arts to build capacity and strengthen communities. An incredible lineup with multiple experiences and the qualifications to have this conversation. Thank you all so much for being here. We will begin with Timaj, who will grace us with a piece of poetry and then go into her introductory remarks. So I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rowaida. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. It's a really important one. And I'm just going to get into my poem. So this poem is called Black Gold. Black Muslim girls, Black Muslim girls, Black Muslim girls, you are more than magic. You are a multitude of dope fly out of this world, love, making love to love, melanated masterpiece. There is nothing tragic about you. The tragedy is living in the kind of world that brings you the kind of grief that has you digging the earth with your teeth, duality wrapped at the tongue as you code switch deep enough to be Black and Muslim, but rarely at the same time. Your spine is a site of intergenerational trauma, and they mine your back until it cracks and exposes the black gold from your backbone that was sought, but this is not a minery. We are the kind of tired you become when you're both the product and the labor, because apparently there is a bed here on our backs that some will sleep on yet call themselves woke. But this is not a dreamland. This is quicksand. We are women with a softness that will sink you and lift you at the same time. Prayer bead woven fingers when we are triggered, then proceed to whisper scripture and strive higher than the brand of justice that was promised here, in the dance between the ephemeral and eternal, here in the in-between, here in the you can't hear yourself loud enough to hear your dreams sometimes, here in the place where a woman at the masjid once asked me where I'm from, and I tell her I'm Ethiopian, and she says, just like Bilal, but then mixes it with dirty looks, mixed with that must be why you're doing it wrong, do it like this, mixed with, so what are you mixed with? Like it's a compliment. And I want to tell her I'm mixed with Black, and even Blacker than that, unapologetically Blacker than Black, Black Muslim girls, Black Muslim girls. I know the world is burning with your names right now, but you are not a forest fire. You are the brilliance of many suns and the wisdom of many moons. I know this system makes you nervous sometimes, but your nervous system was designed to feed you feeling. Impulses through your pulse for healing. Your winters withering in your bloom while holding on to their truths. Your Blackness has always been in season. Your Blackness has always been in season. Your Blackness has always been in season. So I wanted to open with that piece called Black Gold, which I've recently, thank you, turned into a song by the same name. And the reason, I actually want to share the reason why I wrote this piece. It was written about 5 years ago now, 4 years ago. And the story of why I wrote it is really important to this conversation. So let me just share my screen. Give me 1 second and we'll get into that. Just to introduce myself while I'm doing this, my name is Timaj Garad. As was said in the beginning, I'm an artist. I'm looking forward to learning from some of our scholars on the panel. I don't position myself in that particular way, so I'm really just here as a student as well, to listen and to learn and to share some of my experiences working more so in the arts organizing and social justice space. So my work, again, is multidisciplinary. So I'm a poet as well as a community organizer. I organize arts events and an arts educator. So part of what I try to do with my work and what happens naturally is speak on my lived experience. And I believe in the power of storytelling to transform communities and to also create movements within our communities, not just towards awareness, but towards healing as well. So storytelling is a beautiful way of affirming identity, of affirming our right to self-determine. And so that's how I'm using this poem, and that's why I wrote this poem. So let me just share that with you. So can everyone see my screen? Just a thumbs up. Yeah. All right. So this is an image of the music video shoot, actually, for the song Black Gold. And I had a bunch of my friends, my sisters, join me for this. And I think it's really important for us because, you know, being Black and Muslim, as was mentioned, is a conversation that's important because it's not a conversation that we have in our communities, and it's not that identity intersection. Although there's conversations on it now, there's still a long way to go to understand, you know, the needs of Black Muslims, to understand anti-Black racism within our communities. And so this piece was really just a piece to start from our journeys, because you can't know how to heal a community, how to address an issue that's happening within a particular demographic without really understanding their stories and without listening first. And I think that's what we're all here to do. So I wanted to start with, you know, something that I believe captures my experience as a Black Muslim woman. And this song / poem really came out of conversations that I was having about the erasure of that identity of being Black and Muslim. And these conversations I was having with other Black Muslim women in my circle, just friends, casually. And we were talking about the fact that, you know, we feel very fragmented. We feel like you can be Black and Muslim, but then your Muslimness is read differently or even erased sometimes. And then your Blackness is also equally, you know, read differently, erased. And so this nuanced experience is something that I wanted to bring to the surface, and I hadn't seen any representation that specifically speaks to this. So that's why I created this song. And part of it is also to illustrate that storytelling, the power of telling our stories. And when I say storytelling, I'm not just talking about art, I'm talking about these conversations that we're having as well. I'm talking about anytime, you know, we're really bringing to light silences within our communities through speaking the truth, right? So storytelling is such an impactful way to at least begin that conversation, to invite other people into that conversation. But I always center our voices. So I'm not a proponent of this voice of the voiceless. You know, what I try to do is talk about lived experiences in a way that, you know, centers our experience, because we're not going to, if we don't tell our own stories, they're going to be told for us, and they're going to be told badly, right? So that's what Black Gold is all about. So I wanted to share that because it's really kind of the beginning of my artistic journey, at least telling this story. Before we have this conversation, I know you all have definitions, those of you who have registered for this event. I wanted to go over some of the terms that I might be using in this conversation. So the first thing is, you know, anti-Black Islamophobia, which is a specific kind of racism and discrimination experienced by Black Muslims and individuals who are perceived to be Black and Muslim. And I think this is important to distinguish between, you know, Islamophobia that is not anti-Black, because there is, you know, we sometimes tend to, as Muslims, lump everything in one basket, and then under the name of unity and community. But really, community is being able to see and what you're not seeing, and to be able to witness and understand that although we share some of the universalities of, you know, some Islamophobic discrimination, there are nuances that are informed by other identities. So our Blackness and our Muslimness gets read not separately, but in conjunction, and is informed by each other in terms of the way that we experience Islamophobia, as well as in terms of the way that we experience anti-Blackness, right? So really coming into this awareness of not separating those identities, but understanding that the Islamophobia experienced by Black Muslims are nuanced, right? So within that framework, we want to talk about anti-oppression. You might have heard of this term. Anti-oppression is really just the strategies, theories, and actions that challenge society and historically built inequalities and injustices, working towards equitable sharing of power. So when we're framing this whole conversation, it's about how do we work towards, you know, dismantling some of the systems that are not working. So dismantling most of the systems that exist in terms of, you know, understanding the unequal distribution of power. How do we take back our power, and how do we use whatever power you may have or we may have in our community spaces to address that and to resist oppression wherever we find it. And I also want to frame this Islamically, because that's our Islamic duty that the Prophet ﷺ said to, you know, if you see oppression, at first, you know, stop it with your hands if you can, right? So take action if you can. If you can't do that, stop it with your speech. And if you can't do that, then at least hate it in your heart. But at this point in time, we are all in a place where we can stop it with our actions, right? As well as with our speech. So this conversation is also just going beyond just, you know, hating it in our hearts, because I think a lot of the time there's this complacency that happens around, you know, distancing ourselves from what's happening, distancing ourselves from racism. And this is really a conversation about accountability and looking within ourselves at where we have power to change anti-Black Islamophobia, to challenge oppression wherever we find it in the most active way possible. And this, of course, is working towards inclusion, which is the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued within a particular community or society. And in saying that, I want to address, of course, white supremacy, because this is really at the root of all racism. It's a belief system that holds that white people are supreme over other races of people and should therefore dominate over other races. So we're challenging, when we're talking about racism, we also have to talk about white supremacy. So the ideologies that fuel and perpetuate racism. And with that said, I already talked a little bit about the intersection of being Black and Muslim. We'll talk a little bit more about what intersectionality is, which is really kind of acknowledging that identities can't be fragmented from each other, that every individual simultaneously occupies many different social locations and identities with respect to gender, race, social class, sexuality, ability, etc. Right? So I want to talk about these conversations in that kind of framework. So when we talk about, you know, being Black and Muslim, I want to address that Black Muslims are not a monolith, that Black Muslims exist in many different diasporic communities in many different facets. There are Black Muslims that have existed in this country beyond what we typically talk about, which is, you know, the immigration in the 60s, 80s. There are Black Muslims that have been here for over 400 years. So that Black Muslims have a history of being here for 400 years, and that ancestry is not always acknowledged, unfortunately. When we talk about being Muslim, that Black Muslims were the first Muslims in this country. So we want to kind of root that in our historical understanding of Black Muslims specifically in Canada. And there's some research that's been done on this, which I definitely encourage you to read and to delve into. I have some other resources for you when this is done. Maybe they can be emailed out. But one thing I want to review is this systemic review that was done on Black Muslims in Canada by Dr. Fatima Jackson Best, who is a dear friend and a wonderful scholar. She's a researcher, and she mostly research is, social justice issues within vulnerable communities, with the lens of wellness, right, and healing. So within this research, she talks a little bit about where we're at as a community, the experiences of Black Muslims, and reviews different research that has been done on Black Muslim experience. So one of the things that came out of this research is that actually there's not a lot of documentation of our experiences, which in and of itself shows the level of erasure, meaning the fact that really there hasn't been a lot of a centering of the Black Muslim experience within our communities, right? So it really just speaks to how much more work we have to do to understand the experiences of anti-Black racism within our communities. Well, one thing that's highlighted by this research, and she quotes Afua Cooper, where she says, one of the functions of racist discourse is to write Black people out of Canadian history and position us as newcomers, that we started to come after the Second World War and maybe even later in 1962, 1967, whenever, that our presence is a recent one and not a 400-year presence. So as I mentioned earlier, we need to understand that Black Muslims were the first Muslims in this country. There's a long history of this in this country that predates slavery, but in particular, thinking about 25 to 30% of the enslaved Africans in this country, in Canada, and yes, there was slavery in Canada. This is something that I wasn't taught in school and is very much a suppressed history, but 25 to 30% were Muslim, right? So when we're thinking about the history, as well as Black loyalists in Nova Scotia, there's a community of Black people that have been in this country for a very long time. Then their ancestry predates what we conceive of as this kind of post-Second World War, mass migration. So we have to start framing it in that way that, why don't we then position Black Muslims as leaders within this country? Why don't we understand the scholarship that has taken place? Why is there no conversation on this, right? So a lot of the time the conversation is positioning Black Muslims as recent immigrants. So I'm hoping to dispel that myth through this work. So when we talk about being anti-racist, and if you, again, looked at those definitions, then you'll know that anti-racism is very different from just being non-racist. So this is a quote that I love by Angela Davis. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. So what does it mean to be anti-racist? Anti-racism is not just about hating it in your heart. Again, going back to that hadith, anti-racism is about the daily, consistent work that it takes to be in solidarity, to work consistently towards the liberation of Black people, of Black Muslims. So this is, again, our religious responsibility, is our spiritual responsibility, and it's just responsibility, it's our civic duty as well. So looking at where in your life you have power is one place to start. Thinking about how you can use that power and distribute that power so that there is more equity in your community spaces and wherever you see a need to redistribute power and access. What kind of access do you have to resources, to supports? How can you do that on a consistent basis? How can you challenge the racism within your immediate circles, with your family, with your colleagues, et cetera? We need to start having these conversations and being braver about having these conversations. And when I say challenge, I don't just mean a private conversation. I mean consistently challenge in every instance when you hear or see racism take place. And this requires us to be brave. It requires us to give up our privilege in a sense, right? And to share our privilege with others. So I think a lot of the times people are afraid of doing this work because it is hard work and it is continuous self-critique. It's spiritual work. There's a huge aspect of this that is inner work, meaning looking at ourselves and never thinking ourselves separate from the problem, but evaluating how we may be complacent and complicit in perpetuating anti-Black racism. So thinking about constantly engaging in that critical reflection and critique, using our power, distributing resources and support where we can, and continuing to have the difficult conversations with our loved ones and others. So I want to share a little bit of the work that I'm doing. And I know I've been talking for a minute, so I'm gonna end it here. And this is the work that, again, was alluded to in my bio. I run a festival called Luminous Fest. It's a Black Muslim arts festival. And the reason I created this festival is similar to the reason I created that poem that you just heard and the song. It's because it's really important as an artist and as a storyteller for me to tell the stories that are not told in our communities about us, right? So this is a step towards self-determination. It's a step towards taking back our power and reclaiming our stories. And this is important for the healing of our communities too. When we have the conversation, especially, you know, as Black Muslims, as those who are on the receiving end of anti-Black Islamophobia, it's important to also think about our healing and how can we create spaces and take up spaces in ways that affirm our right to exist and our right to exist as who we are, right? So this is more of a, I guess, a short documentary about that festival and about some of what it aims to achieve. So you'll hear from some of the artists, you'll hear from some of the participants.
This whole festival, the whole premise of it is just to give people space to, you know, express themselves, to connect with each other, to their community, and of course to support Black Muslim cultural producers, artists, and entrepreneurs. This event, I think, is super important for the Muslim community. I think it's important for us to celebrate diversity and have spaces specifically for Black Muslims to engage with. As a Black Muslim myself, with young Black children, I really like an opportunity to bring them out to celebrate Eid, to see Black excellence, to see art by Black people, business from Black Muslims, to see themselves really up on stage and in the vendors. So it's just a really beautiful opportunity.
Exclusivity has always been an issue for many Muslims, right? And so when they see that in any way, shape, or form, they react, as opposed to thinking about the root causes of it and trying to solve the problem itself rather than the symptoms, right? So we see that in many other cultures, many other aspects of our Muslim community here, and it's unfortunate, but it's something that we need to work collaboratively together to actually get down to the root of it. So when you see programs like this, they should happen, because that's actually, once again, not only highlighting a deeper problem, but also allowing people to actually have a remedy or a sense of healing that allows them to be able to look at the problem as it is without having to deal with it directly.
She had a craving, so she ate the porridge. Goldilocks was tired, a little fatigued, wanted to rest, so she took a nap.
There's this kind of conundrum about Blacks and being Muslim. Most people are not really aware about the situation. So when you live in a non-diverse environment, you get to see people are not really aware of that, and it's a good opportunity for people to come around and hear stories, hear poetry, and lectures to get them thinking and wanna fix the situation, I say.
And just writing that story and telling that story is healing for us. It's a source of healing.
The type of space I'm trying to create really speaks to a response, but also a continued kind of growth of community. So a response to what's happening and just to continue to build community from that.
Okay, so I wanted to share that I wanted to share that because first, I'm incredibly proud of all of the artists and contributors and of this initiative, but also because I think it's an important piece to really think about how do we then build community, right? And how can you be a part of facilitating that and creating space or making space for that to continue to happen. So when we talk about being in solidarity, what does it actually look like? Who does not have a seat at the table and why? Where do you have power in your life and how can you redistribute it? What gaps exist in our education about certain communities and in general? And how can you address that? And how can we start to, re-educate and unlearn some of the harmful ideologies? And again, how do we facilitate healing? I think by and large, this initiative, Luminous Fest, is about Black joy. It's about celebrating Black stories, and how do we then facilitate the healing of our communities? This is just a start, and we hope to do even more. So if you're interested in this work, you can follow luminous_fest on Instagram, and we'll have more about that. And then I have one other thing that I wanted to share before I sign off. Let me just find it. Okay. It's just a resource. So this resource is something that I found back in June. I don't know if you can still see that. Something that I found back in June, the Black Islam syllabus. So it's a resource for continued learning. I think we need to learn simultaneously as we are actively building community, right? So it's not about, okay, first I need to learn everything that I need to know. I need to unlearn first and then act. No, it's do what you can while you are learning, right? So this resource is a syllabus. It's pretty comprehensive on different texts. It touches on scholarship within the community. It touches on different histories of Black Muslims. And yeah, it's a really great resource. And it's by Dr. Kayla Renee Wheeler, as well as Professor Najiba Saeed, in I guess collaboration with the Muslim Anti-Racist Collective. And the goal is to provide teachers, professors, researchers, journalists, and just people in general interested in learning about Islam with resources on Black Muslims to promote a more inclusive approach to the study of Islam. So I will share this link and other resources as well. And yes, so that's pretty much it. I'm sorry if I took up too much time, but that's what I want to share to start. And I'm really honored and excited to listen to Akila and Yasmin as well.
Maj, thank you so much. I think those remarks, the videos, I mean, you hit on so many different important aspects. And I think two things that I really like to share. I think as a fellow storyteller and someone working in media and journalism, there's absolutely this problem with Black Muslims being in the afterthought, right? When we're talking about the conversations of Islam and Muslims, the default first comes to Arabs and South Asians, right? We see this not just in our communities, we see this in mainstream representation. So I think carving out that space for storytellers to take ownership is so incredibly important. And then also this concept of joy, right? This is heavy work. And I think it's particularly heavy for Black Muslims like yourselves, feeling the need to constantly have this conversation. So carving out these specific spaces where people can just have a good time. And I think that just made me really happy. And I think it's incredibly important for spaces like that to exist, because oftentimes you don't want to educate and teach people, right? There's dedicated time for that work, and there's time to just be and live in those spaces. And I think it's so incredible that you have been able to carve out such a space. And it was just so amazing to see all that joy, in those spaces. And so I really commend you on that. And thank you for everything that you've shared. So much more I want to comment on, but we'll save that for the Q&A. We will now hand it over to Akila, who is going to be giving us her introductory remarks.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hello. Thanks for attending. Today, I want to take just a short amount of time to talk about something that is really odd. And that is that race is a social construct. And by that I mean, whatever race you think you are, you're actually kind of not. And the reason why I say you're kind of not is because there is no proof and there's no scientific evidence that you are what you think you are. The reason why there's no scientific evidence is because you are actually not, none of us are, scientifically a race. So race is actually a concept that was first articulated, at least in documented historical files, in the 1450s by a Portuguese by the name of Gomes de Zurara. He was the first, at least noted, person who came up with the concept of Blackness, who articulated about Blackness and therefore whiteness. Gomes de Zurara did this because he was working for the Portuguese royalty at the time and was tasked with coming up with some justification for the enslavement of Black people from the continent of Africa and for the quest of colonialization and the usurping of indigenous lands. By 1776, German scientists came up with a classification of a number of different races of people, which is still pretty much in effect today. So less than 300 years now, we've had these real classifications of various races of people along the lines of skin color. And the reason why the skin color was named is because it was important to colonialize people who were under the quest to colonialize foreign lands and to enslave Black bodies for free labor. It was important for them to quickly be able to identify where people belonged. And so skin color was a good marker. In 2003, there was a human genome project that took place wherein it was discovered that human beings are 99.9% genetically similar, which means that there's no chromosome for race. There's no genetic marker for the determination of the race that you purport to be of. You were classified, as we all were, according to the skin color, just as an easy marker for the hierarchical distribution of people for the purpose of enslavement and colonialization. And because of the hierarchical distribution, European people who did this classified themselves as at the top, and therefore therein was the birth of white supremacy. People who think that they are better than Black people, oftentimes people who are racialized, Muslim people, and other people who have not been classified as race, place themselves above Black people because of the hierarchy of racism. So if you're not white, closest to white is considered to be better. And we see that in Muslim communities wherein light skin is considered to be superior to dark skin in spouse selection. People who have green eyes are considered to be more suitable for marriage, regardless of whether or not they're abusers, than people who have the color eyes that most people in the world have, my color eyes, mostly your color eyes, most likely. And so therein was the birth of the hierarchy of races according to white supremacy. The concept of these races is not just because of physical markers. It's not like people were saying, you know, this is a dark-skinned person vis-a-vis the other people. That wasn't the case. There was a classification of people came with the attribution of characteristics falsely attributing beauty to people who have light skin and light eyes, falsely attributing goodness to people who have light skin and good eyes, and light eyes, falsely attributing intelligence and honor to people who were white, even though the white people who came up with this concept were engaging in the most heinous crimes to humanity, which still have ripple effects that we feel today. So This was a lie. The concept of actual races being real is a lie. And it's a lie that each and every one of us was told, was taught, and we're imbued with these racist ideology before we were even 4 years of age. And so if you've lived your life thinking, what does it matter? Why do we have to talk about this? I don't want to talk about it. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you because you're one of the people on the hierarchy of races. And you're one of the people who's likely living your life according to this lie that's not even really, it's not very old. And so if you've lived your life with your head in the sand about these things, then you have also put yourself in a situation to not be able to unlearn and to continue to perpetuate the lie of the scientific classification of people according to race and the hierarchical valuation of people based on melanin in their skin. And so as we go through this learning and unlearning today, I would encourage you to realize that it was a lie, it continues to be a lie, it's relatively new, and it's something that you need to unlearn. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sister Akila. Really appreciated all of those remarks. And I think having the point of history is going to help us all better understand not just the root of a lot of these conversations, but how to move forward. And you can't move forward until we learn everything that happened backwards. I appreciate that. I'm really excited to dig a little bit more into some of the remarks that you said, but I do want to hand it over to, last but not least, Yasmin. Yasmin, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me as part of this. Thank you everyone for your comments so far. There's so much good stuff that's already been talked about, so that I'm not going to go over again. But what I would like to do is kind of build on it through talking a little bit about my personal experience and how that might help us understand what's actually going on. So I was born in Sudan, and my family migrated to Australia when I was about 1.5 years. And my parents, throughout my upbringing, never referred to themselves as Black, because in Sudan, they weren't Black. They weren't considered Black. I mean, we're light-skinned. There are people in Sudan with much darker skin. The concept of Blackness doesn't exist the same way it exists in former colonies like Australia and in Canada and in the United States. And as we've just heard, the construct of race was all about control. It was all about how do we classify a group of people so that we are able to own them as property, so that we are able to dehumanize them and be able to trade them and use them as assets and completely take away their humanity. And it was, and I think this is a really important thing to understand, the classification was about control and was about power. But because of the world in which my parents grew up in Sudan, even though there was a history of slavery, it didn't impact their lives in the same way as, say, if they had grown up in the United States or in Canada. And so they came to Australia thinking of themselves as Sudanese, engaging within the Muslim community in Brisbane, where I grew up. And the other thing I should also note is that in Brisbane, we were the second Sudanese family there. The next Sudanese family didn't come till 10 years later. So I didn't have a group of people around me to say, oh, this is what it means to be Black, or this is what it means to be Sudanese. All my information just came from my parents, and nobody around me was going to tell me what being Black meant, because that wasn't part of the conversation within the Muslim community. The main focus within the Muslim community that I grew up in was, oh, well, the non-Muslims, the government, etc., have issues with us and we're racialized and there's Islamophobia, and all of that is very, very legitimate. But that was my primary kind of lens through which I engaged through all of my justice work, right? But what's quite interesting about that is then you start to, I think it didn't really come, for me, the concept of Blackness didn't come to consciousness until I started moving around and also until I started paying a little bit more attention, actually. Because the reality is, even though nobody talked about things, there was the hierarchy, right? There was the light-skinned Arab community who saw that they had the birthright to Islam. And there were the South Asian community who saw that if you were from the continent of Africa, that somehow made you lesser. And these things didn't necessarily play out in explicit ways, but as you get older, you start to notice these things and you start to look for answers. Why is it that, you know, it's never the dark-skinned brother who is the head of the mosque? Or why is it that there's an element of racial, let's say racial tension, racism that exists within racial tension, you know, I mean, let's call it is what it is, right? Why is it that there's things happening that we also never name? And if you do, well, people are, oh, well, Bilal, you know, Bilal. Firstly, you can't just always go back to Bilal. He's one dude, right? One dude. There's actually way more Black people than Bilal. I'm just going to put it out there. But also, Bilal was a slave. He was a freed slave. Like, is the one Black person that we're going to talk about a freed slave? Is that how it's going to be in the whole of the Muslim history, right? So we start to come, I then start to try to engage in the concept of what it means to be Black, and also what it means to be part of a migrant community in a former colony that is still super tied to all the geopolitics and the foreign policy. Because let's be clear here. All of us are engaged. We care about what's going on in Palestine. We care about what's going on in Yemen. We care about what's going on in Syria. Our communities are so tied to what's happening to the ummah all around the world, right? And yet this ummah is still playing in the same geopolitical landscape that is impacted and governed by the very politics, the very power of this white supremacist world that we're talking about. So like, yes, Saudi has Mecca, but Saudi is also involved in some of the most racist, toxic foreign policy and geopolitical movements there is. I mean, let's talk about Qatar having the World Cup, and let's talk about all the people of color, all the people with darker skin who are not paid very much and who are building the stadiums and so on. And think about, is this what Islam is? Like, is this what Islam is? Because for me, I mean, I can talk about this for days, right? But ultimately for me, Islam and Muslims should be leading the way when it comes to tackling anti-Blackness and racism and white supremacy and social injustice in the world. It is our mandate. It is our mandate as Muslims. That is what we're here to do. And you know what? Even if it means that giving up privilege and power in this world, hello, we've got the afterlife. That's what we're here to do. That's our job here. Our job here is to do the absolute best that we possibly can, to live our lives to serve our God as best as we can. And Allah has made it our mandate to fight for justice. That's what the Prophet ﷺ did. And so it boggles my mind when we think that as Muslims, all we have to do is take care of ourselves and then leave the other stuff for other people. That's not how this is supposed to be. We should be on the front line in every fight, using every bit of power that we have. And when we see the fellow, like, you know how we're always about talking about the nasiha and giving each other advice? The advice is not about how short your skirt is or how tight your jeans are. The advice is, what are you doing with your time and your money and your power and your privilege? That is the advice that we should be giving each other. So I'm going to leave it at that, but remind us that it is our job, it is our duty, it is our responsibility as Muslims to make sure that the liberatory framework that we have been given by our God is something that we do justice to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. You've hit on so many topics, and you know, we're blessed to be here for a couple of hours, but like you mentioned, this is something that we could talk about for days. And really, I think hitting what Tamaj was saying earlier, that this is a continuous process, right? You don't hit a level of, oh, I'm anti-racist, I'm done, right? Like, I'm good guys, I'm one of the good people, like this is over, right? This is not, it is not a milestone that anyone hits, that this is a consistent and continuing process of learning and unlearning. And I think a lot of us struggle with that concept, right? You have a few key terms and you feel like you're equipped to go into the world and solve the racial justice issues. And I think that's a huge problematic mindset, I think that we find many people in. And I really appreciated the Bilal point, because I think this is an unfortunate deflector that diminishes the importance and values of Bilal to Islam, but also all of the key Black Muslims in our history. And it is more unfortunate when it is used as a deflector. And so I do want to talk about this and unpack this a little bit. When we're having this conversation in Muslim spaces, I think the two common, responses or the defensive responses, I'll say, is the pointing to Bilal and to pointing to, right, the last khutbah of the Prophet, saying that no one is superior than the other, right? We do this, but Islam this, right? Islam doesn't condone racism. Islam is not racist, right? There's taking the action of, a person and deflecting it to the race. And then secondarily, I also see people talking about, but we face Islamophobia. We face an injustice as Muslims, right? And I'm talking specifically about, the South Asians, the Arabs, the non-Black Muslims who talk about, the hate crimes against Muslim women and the profiling of our men and just, the structural and the everyday Islamophobia. So I kind of want to talk about the links between racism, whether we're talking about anti-Black racism or racism as a whole, and Islamophobia, because I think sometimes folks in our community can categorize this as a box and this as a box. This is our experience, this is their experience, but there's a lot more there, I think, in common. And if you're addressing one, you have to address both. So I'd love to talk about this a little bit. Who wants to go first?
I mean, I can jump in and then we can kind of all build off each other, I'm sure. I think, so on the Bilal or the Islam thing, the very interesting thing about that, the very short way that I usually respond, and I'd be really curious to see how everybody else responds, is that, like, Islam is not Muslims. And I think we so often will say, but Islam says this. And you're like, yeah, sure, but the Muslims aren't doing that. So, like, Islam is not this thing that exists by itself and it just kind of happens by accident. Our job is to live Islam by as, like, in the best version that we know how, and we're falling short. We are falling short. And also, if there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world now, and we've had how many 1400 plus years of Muslims hanging around the world. And if you can only name me one Black person, what does that say about you? Like, really? Because Black people are the global majority. So, I mean, I'm also a bit more sassy. So people don't ask me that question that often. I mean, I'm curious, what do everybody else do? What are your responses?
Well, I addressed this in my piece, where the story that I shared, so it was a Pakistani woman at the masjid, and she asked me where I'm from. She kind of looked me up and down, and, it was only Indo-Pakistani folks in that masjid, in that particular masjid space. And, I told her, and she's like, oh, mashallah, just like Bilal, but, do your people not know how to do this correctly? Or is this what your people teach? And then insert anti-Black comment here. And so that experience is really kind of part of what made me want to speak on this issue in general, because this is something that happens often where we as Black people are tokenized in a particular way. And Bilal, unfortunately, is tokenized as well, and positioned as the only historical evidence of Black Muslims. And as we know, that's not true. And there's a whole history of Black scholarship that also is part of our heritage that we don't have access to, or that we don't explore because of that. So it's really also used, as you mentioned, Rowaida, as a way to kind of silence any kind of critique about, racism that we observe, that, oh no, Islam isn't racist because look, we have Bilal and we love Bilal, right? So it's weaponized against us as a silencing tool. And it's a way to deflect or escape accountability. And so when there's something that happens in the community, there is very little accountability because people point to, again, Islam as if Islam is representative of the actions of Muslims. Like, yes, Islam is perfect, Muslims are not, right? So it's used a lot of the times, these examples to silence someone who has a particular grievance around racism, or to really just not even talk about racism at all within our communities, that we have somehow achieved a pinnacle, the pinnacle, which is Islam, and we have not. The point is that we are constantly striving to serve God, and we're constantly failing to meet that pinnacle. That's the whole point of being a human being, right? So that's why I always center like being critical and thinking about what is it that we are doing? How are we using whatever power we have, whether it's, you know, you're someone who is non-Black within a particular community, who is not there, who and why aren't they there? Constantly thinking about these things, and also addressing something that is really important, which is the guilt. Sometimes people escape accountability because of guilt, but also sometimes people center their feelings in this, right? Guilt is only useful as useful as it is to get you to another emotion that mobilizes you towards action. There is no point in festering in your guilt, right? So people sometimes are afraid to look inward and are afraid to look around, right, at what they may be complicit in, because they don't want to feel the burden of the guilt, right? So I think that is also important to address that, you know, as human beings, we need to understand making a mistake doesn't mean that you're no longer qualified to continue to learn, right? Making a mistake is making a mistake. You take responsibility for that and you move forward and you continue. So I think that there is, now that I'm seeing this kind of performative allyship take place, where people are really getting on board with, you know, Black Lives Matter, you know, as we saw in June, posting the black boxes on Instagram and whatnot. But then there's sort of a fading that tends to happen when the issue isn't hot, even though the issue is still ongoing. And the reason why it fades when it's not hot or when it's not viral is because people don't want to feel that sense of responsibility or that sense of guilt. So I think we really need to address the emotional realities of doing the work, and what we can do to kind of do it in a consistent way that continues to obviously not create these silences that are currently in our communities. So sorry, I went on for long, but I think it's really important to address that, you know, that the guilt as well as tokenizing Bilal and that sort of thing, they're not separate things. It's actually an emotional issue that we have to address as well.
Yeah, thank you for that point. What I'd like to talk about and to build on is that we do need to take this down to the individual level. Talking about Islam and talking about Muslims means the people who are on the line, means the people who are listening to this, you know, at some point. If you are a Muslim, and particularly if you're not a Black Muslim, this is about you asking yourself, how are you living your life? The responsibility of Muslims is towards social justice, because we are supposed to be enjoining the good and forbidding the wrong, right? And so through that, you should also be doing that to yourself. You should be also accepting the gifts of correction that other people offer you and receiving those gifts of correction with grace and applying them. So this is about us talking about, where are you on this continuum of social justice? If you are a Muslim who's not Black, do you actually care about Black Muslims when you talk about caring about the Ummah? Do you actually think that Black Muslims are your brothers and sisters? And do you behave as though they are, or we are, your brothers and sisters? How do you treat Black Muslims? Do you say that you're okay with Black Muslims, but absolutely not if they're going to marry into your family? Are you the non-Black Muslim person who has to have your children marry somebody from your village back home, even though they've been in the diaspora for a generation? Are you participating in asabiya? Because if all of those or any of those things are true, then you need to do some work. And in the same way that we talk about white fragility, I think that there's fragility that is not even in white people, it's in brown people, it's in Arab people who have this thing about, oh, I have no interest in talking about racism, or this comfort and privilege where they can actually say, I feel uncomfortable talking about race. It doesn't matter if you feel uncomfortable. Talking about racism and addressing racism, because it is your Islamic responsibility to do so, is not about your level of comfort. It's about what is right. And if you think about talking about racism and you retreat from that because you're emotionally uncomfortable while your alleged brothers and sisters are dying, are being killed by the police, are being suspended and expelled from educational opportunities, are being passed over for jobs, maybe by you yourself, who won't hire somebody who's not whatever it is that you are because you practice asabiya. If any of those things are happening, then it's more important that we look at the grave injustices to people's lives, because they end up shaping and impacting an entire community and an entire society. Because if any of us is not allowed to reach our maximum potential, then our society is less than it could have been, less than it ought to have been. And maybe you have been complicit in acting as a barrier to someone's actualizing their potential as a human being. And so those things trump people's comfort levels in conversations, don't they? They're actually, and they're not the, just emotional discomfort conversations. They're actually about physical discomfort when a bullet hits your body. The actual discomfort when you can't have a job that you qualify for. So that's what we're talking about doing, real work, and talking about things that actually matter and that you're actually tasked with as a Muslim. So if you purport to be a Muslim, then this is actually your responsibility. It's not your fault, but it is certainly your problem.
Can I build
on
that?
I'm sorry, I just want to say one more thing.
Yeah,
one more thing. This panel needs to look different next time. There needs to be a non-Black person who's Muslim saying exactly the same things that us Black Muslim sisters are saying, because that person needs to be the Arab or the South Asian anti-racist who's standing here, because anti-Black racism is not the problem of Black people. It's the problem of people who perpetuate it.
Here, sister. I'd love to build on that if I may as well. And point to, I think, Rowaida, the second half of your question, which I totally skipped, which was about the idea of people saying, oh, but, we face Islamophobia as well. And, how can we don't have the capacity to deal with more things, which I think does the very thing that Tamaj was speaking about. I think that idea of silencing and completely erasing, because it implies that there are no people who are dealing with the challenges of living in a world that is anti-Black and the challenges of living in a world that is Islamophobic. And I think somebody, I can't remember who spoke about the topic of, or the idea of intersectionality. Intersectionality, as mentioned, is about what happens when those intersections of systems of oppression lie on top of each other. And it's not that they just get added to each other, they compound. Their impact is exponential, right? And also the silencing is even more dangerous, because there's no space then, right? Where do you have space if you're supposed to go, you go to the mosque and you're like, oh, this will be the place where people will really get me and they'll back me, and then there's nothing. And then you go to, a meeting of Black racial justice activists, and it's either done through the church or it's completely in a non-Muslim context, and the concept of you as a Muslim is something that they don't really want to deal with. It means that all of a sudden you fall through the cracks. And also, when people say, oh, we're already dealing with something else, let me remind you, it means that you're not having to deal with being a Black person. It means that actually you don't have to suffer on a particular system of oppression, and therefore you can help me out, right? It's like, alhamdulillah, I don't have a disability. And so it is my job as a person without a disability to make sure that the spaces I engage in are accessible. I can't be like, oh, well, I'm dealing with like sexism and racism, Islamophobia. I don't have time to deal with, accessibility stuff. Habibi, Allah gave you all of your abilities. So make sure you use what you have to level the playing field for those who don't have the same access as you. And so I think that although, yes, it can feel like a lot, remember that the fact that you don't have to think about something, the fact that you just don't, it doesn't even occur to you, that is a privilege. That means that you're not suffering under a system of oppression. And therefore you have an extra reserve of power that I don't have, that none of us on this panel have. And that is something that Allah gave you. And we know that the responsibility then is for you to use that wisely. I'm just leaving it at that, yeah.
I think those are excellent points. And I think also, understanding, in addition to everything that you said, that the systems of oppression that created Islamophobia, right, were built off of the systems that were originally put in place to put down, to oppress, Black people. And I think specifically, and I'm thinking about speaking from an American context, as an American based here, the surveillance programs that are currently put in place that were specifically amplified in a post 9/11 world were originally built when they were surveilling the Black Muslims, right, and the social justice movements by the Black Panthers and just the civil rights era specifically. This is where the roots came, and so they were built upon one another. And I think to disconnect them does an injustice to the historical framework as to everything that is happening.
Can I just add one more thing? And I think there's also so much for Muslim communities in former colonies to learn from and with Black communities that have been working in oppressive systems for centuries. We might tend to look at only our own histories for lessons and for solidarity. But I have found that there is such great value and great solidarity in the Black feminist spaces, in looking at the racial justice movements and the civil justice movements. So rather than thinking of ourselves as separate to them, thinking of ourselves as in solidarity allows also for us to be much stronger against oppressive regimes and oppressive systems.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us back to kind of the next question that I want to talk about. So obviously we talked about, the hot topics for now, and that brings up the Black Lives Matter movement that's been happening, both, that started in the US, but also just everywhere across the globe. Let's break this down for viewers a little bit who have no idea what is happening. What are these people protesting? Talk to us a little bit about what is the Black Lives Matter movement? And Akila, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit. The phrase is very, very catchy, and people have been usurping it in every manner possible. Black Lives Matter was actually what gave rise to it, and its prominence was police brutality against Black bodies in the first place. The killing of Black people with impunity, moving from lynching Black bodies in the United States of America. Actually, let's back up from the enslavement of African bodies, Black bodies, and absolute impunity with which you can manipulate, mutilate, rape, kill Black bodies, to the post-slavery period where there was rampant lynching of Black bodies and perpetual raping of Black bodies. And then when lynching was, hard fought to become kind of discouraged, it became the killing of Black bodies by police officers, which is really just tantamount to modern day lynching. And we can't say that it takes place in the South. Please don't turn your attention south of the border. Look at the land on which you stand, remembering that slavery, that Black people and Indigenous people were enslaved here in Canada, if you're here. But I mean, Canadians, we have this tendency to act as though it didn't happen here, just because we were not taught the truth of the fact that people were enslaved here, Black and Indigenous bodies, and that police kill Black and Indigenous people in Ontario, in Manitoba, right across this country. And so Black Lives Matter gave rise to the topics at hand. They wanted to, and they continue to do a good job shedding light on the fact that Black bodies are being killed with impunity. And so it needed to be said, Black Lives Matter. Why? Because it didn't seem to matter. Black lives didn't seem to matter, don't seem to matter. Black lives don't matter because you can kill Black people with impunity. And so, you know, even though we are human beings, because we were given this attribution of characteristics which named us as subhuman, which at one point we were actually classified as property, like a table. And then another point we were classified as 2/3 of a human being. And that people still have this ideology that we are less than, that we are not as intelligent as, because you have that white supremacist ideology that's operational at all times, right? Because you were taught that before you were 5 and you never undertook the work to unlearn the foolishness that you were taught. So it's operating in the back of your head. And so you look at us and you see part human, subhuman, beast-like person, inferior person-ish kind of thing. That's why Black Lives Matter had to be and has to be there. Saying Black Lives Matter because in most non-Black communities, Black lives don't actually matter. In Muslim communities, Black lives actually don't matter. And in non-Muslim communities, Black lives actually don't matter. So we have to say that. Imagine that. We actually have to say that Black lives matter. Wow, this is where we are.
All great points. And I think one thing that I definitely want to address, you know, and we see this is that tends to be the first pushback to just saying that those few words, right? Those 3 words, Black Lives Matter, is, well, don't all lives matter?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that too. And how insidious is that? The people who say, don't all lives matter, don't live like all lives matter. Because if they actually lived like all lives matter, they would be enraged at the killing of Black bodies with impunity. They would take to the streets. They would protest the murder of Black children, of unarmed Black men in Ontario, in Nova Scotia, in Montreal, in wherever you are. They would be protesting in the streets. They would call attention to, but they're not. They're at home drinking tea and of course making salah, because of course, you know, it's wajib. And so because nobody was noticing, no, we don't have to say all lives matter, because all lives mattered except Black lives, because of the hierarchy based on white supremacy. At the flip polar opposite of white is Black in our language and in our social construction of race. The opposite of white, and our system is built on white supremacy. So that means that Black is at the bottom. And if you're non-Black, you were not looking. You were drinking tea, remember? Or you were going for your Maghrib Salah, when you didn't pay attention to the fact that another Black child, another Black man, another Black woman, another Black child, another Black man, another Black woman was murdered, and with impunity. You were watching TV, you were making salah, you didn't notice. And that's why we cannot say all lives matter. All lives have always mattered except Black lives.
And not to drag this out too long, I do want to throw one other point out there. We specifically got this question, and I think it's important to address. And Yasmin, I want to loop you in as well, is the concept of gun violence, right? Specifically in Black communities, someone is asking, and I know you touched upon this a little bit, Akila, when we talked about police brutality, but also this concept of Black on Black crime, right? And I think this is something that gets brought up in the same breath, and it was a specific question that was asked. So I just wanted to kind of put that out into the sphere, and how important in the response to this concept of gun violence and Black on Black crime. And then Yasmin, you want to start us off, and then we could bring it back to the rest of the panelists.
Sure. I think what I'm always fascinated by is where these terms come from. Because you'll never hear Black people talking about Black on Black crime, right? Often where that term gets used is by people in positions of power and leadership, people in the media, people who want to make a specific point about a community, who create a myth, create a story around something that's very powerful, and then we start to believe in that story. The reality is, if you're in a majority white country, like the United States or Australia, or arguably Canada, I'm not sure about the specifics, but the majority of the crime is white on white. But you will never hear white on white crime, because that's just crime, folks, right? And the majority of crime generally is local. So if you're in a community where there is a lot of Black people, because that's the community you live in, and a crime is committed, then the likelihood is that it's going to be somebody who's also Black. But the person hasn't specifically gone out looking for a Black person to commit a crime to or on. So again, let's think about the way that we use language. Language creates stories, and we are meaning-making machines. As human beings, we like to look for meaning. And so when people say Black on Black crime, I'm like, why have you it's just like, and we all know the feeling of when an attack happens and then all of a sudden it's a Muslim terrorist attack. And we're like, oh, why do they always talk about the Muslims? Right? We know that feeling. We get super frustrated about that feeling. Well, imagine being Black. Right? It's the same phenomenon of people trying to create a problem that's specific and related to a group, so that you forget about the fact, you don't pay attention to the fact that all the other crimes, well, they're committed by the white folks, the non-Black folks, etc. The other thing that I wanted to mention and build on the All Lives Matter conversation is that it's really fascinating to me when people refuse to allow Black people the right to just say that they're Black. So if I say Black Lives Matter, why do you feel the urge to not allow me as a Black person to center my Blackness? And you feel like you need to replace that with all. There's this deep resistance to allowing Black people to center their Blackness. Why? Is it seen as threatening? Do you feel excluded? Do you feel like your power is being taken away, maybe? Or are you just not used to sharing space with Black people? Are you just not used to allowing Black people to exist in the same level, echelon, whatever as you? So when somebody says Black Lives Matter, my life matters, you're like, are you saying, no, I didn't say anything about your life, sir. But the insecurity that you have then when I say Black Lives Matter, you feel like I'm excluding you. That insecurity, what is that telling us about you? What is that telling us about how you perceive Black people? Why do you find it so difficult? Often the people who get the angriest are the people who feel like they have the most to lose. And why would they have the most to lose? I mean, you tell me.
So I want to add on that. Thank you for that, Yasmin. And in terms of, so I want to touch on first, what was the comment about, why can't we say all lives matter? And it's interesting, like you point out, like who has the most to lose? Because I see this come up a lot of the times, not necessarily with just white people, but with people that are protecting their proximity and closeness to whiteness, right? So it's about you feel threatened that your privileges will be taken from you because now you are being called upon to share those privileges with others, to dismantle a system in a way that will evenly distribute power, in a just society, right? So it's about, what does freedom, someone else's liberation, take away from you? And the answer is nothing, but the perception that people have is that their liberation is diminished. But actually, in reality, liberation in general means liberation for all. It's not, oh, some people are free and some people are mobile and some people have access and other people don't. There's this myth also that's created around scarcity, that if I give from myself, if I give what I have, then there won't be enough, right? When in reality, there is an abundance. We have enough to share. But the myth of scarcity, again, is what has perpetuated colonialism. It's what has perpetuated the enslavement of others. This idea of, well, what will happen if I am not in control and I am not in power, right? It's the root evil to believe that there's something to lose by being generous, by providing access, right? That greed takes over when people start thinking about these conversations. And I alluded to it before, and think about the emotional reaction you're having. Think about the fear that you're experiencing, and what does that actually mean? Like what, when you reimagine an equitable future where you're able to share that power, what will you actually lose? Right. So I think that in thinking about that, people need to be honest about where the fear is coming from. And the fear is not coming from the fact that what they think it's coming from. It's not, oh, well, I don't know if I ideologically believe in this, because if you believe that Black death should not happen, then you believe in Black Lives Matter and you should not be challenging it. But in reality, those that are challenging it are really just protecting what they fear to lose, right? In a white supremacist society, which is their proximity to whiteness, or if they're white, what their whiteness affords them, the privileges they afford, that affords them on the backs of Black people. And then you also mentioned about Black on Black crime. The myths, thank you, Yasmin, for mentioning the myths, because we create stories. And as a storyteller, I'm always looking out for stories, because there is a very insidious, covert, but also overt way in which our media and representation and media, not just the news, but in movies, films, whatever it is, music, creates this pathologizing of Black communities. That there is something fundamentally wrong with being Black, or being in a particular, or even being in a Black community, like your social location down to everything around you, right? Or that there's something wrong specifically with Black culture. And we see this in terms of the ways in which African-American culture and the music and the clothing and everything is hyper surveilled and is criticized, when really there's nothing fundamentally wrong with those things when you really look at it, right? So it's, where is this pathologizing coming from? Well, it's definitely used as a tool, again, to silence, so that if you think of a particular community as bad, then when they seek justice, then you think, well, you did it to yourselves, right? So it's a tool of oppression and suppression. And also, having that myth serves the status quo, to continue to not have to deal with what's actually happening, to not actually have to make systemic changes, just to have these programs that cover what's going on, or that respond to it. Everything in our system is about responding to what's happening, as opposed to actually dismantling it. So that's why when there are calls to defund the police, all of a sudden people are upset. All of a sudden people are trying to protect their system because they think it protects them, right? When in actuality, we need to dismantle the whole system, because what we're being offered is not solutions. It's something that is functioning off of those myths to provide Band-Aid programs or whatever it is, that, oh, your community needs this type of support or this type of service, when in fact, it's the system that is disadvantaging Black people and pathologizing and perpetuating these myths.
I think these are all excellent points. Yes, thank you. I'm so intent on listening, and I'm just focusing on absorbing everything that everyone's saying. And as obviously a non-Black Muslim myself, I think it is a good reminder for me, as it is for everyone, like again, talking about this continuous journey. I also just want to remind folks who are watching to submit their questions. As you can see, our panelists will handle all of them, the easy ones, the hard ones, the weirdly worded ones. I will take care of that for you. But we are still taking the questions. We have about 30 minutes left in the program. So I just want to encourage everyone to make use of this space, and being part of being active listeners is asking questions so that you can walk away with action items and responses. We will get to that. I do want to ask a little bit about, I know we touched upon this in the very, very beginning, and I think it's great to bring back this concept, right? We hear this word of, okay, I know there's a problem, I understand it, I see it, I hear it. How do I be an ally, right? Like that's the word that is thrown, right? The word ally. And we talk about, the Angela Davis quote, one of my favorites that we brought up earlier, right? That it's not enough to be against racism, but how to be anti-racist. And we did mention also the key term, performative allyship. So I want to unpack a little bit of these terms. Someone did put in the questions of, are things like putting black boxes on Instagrams and Twitter handles, are they effective? So I think if we want to answer that question first, is it effective? And then go into the broader topic of allyship. And so, Akila, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I actually will defer on the response to the black boxes, but I do want to talk. So one of my sisters will respond to that, hopefully. I want to just talk about allyship. And I say it's not right. And the reason why I say that allyship is not right is because words matter a lot. And allyship positions people as external to the crux of the matter. Allyship positions people as somebody who is supporting Black people as they walk through this unfortunate situation that they have as Black people who are being discriminated against because of their skin, because of their race. Nothing has happened to us because of our skin. Nothing has happened to us because of our race. It has happened because of racist ideology, which is in the minds of non-Black people. Okay? And so it is not our problem. It is the problem of society. And so as somebody who's in society, you cannot escape your responsibility or by positioning yourself as an ally. This is your problem. So you need to get out in front of it. You need to deal with it in your own ideology and in the ideologies of your family members and of your community members and of the members of your society, because it's actually your problem. You don't act as your support person. Oh, I'm going to support Black people. No, don't support Black people. Become an anti-racist and deal with the racism in your own heart and in your own, you know what I mean? Actively involve yourself as an anti-racist. That's where we need people to be situated. Allyship is not for this situation, okay? Because racism is so pervasive and so fundamental to your existence and your social location that you cannot put yourself outside of that.
Absolutely. Anyone what add, Timaj, Jasmine?
Yeah, sorry, I think my internet dropped out a bit. Sorry if something came through strangely. I 100% agree with Sister Akila there. And what's really interesting to me about the term ally is that it kind of, again, to kind of build on what Sister said, it implies that we're just kind of walking through this really, this natural habitat where racism exists. That racism has just kind of happened and, you know, somebody's going to help me through it. This was a system that was deliberately created, right? And the only solution is for it to be deliberately dismantled. And if you're benefiting from it, then you have to be part of dismantling it. Like, it's not like, oh, I just don't like air, so I'm going to stop breathing. It doesn't work like that. I don't like white supremacy, so I'm just going to stop being a part of it. You have to actively choose and actively work. I mean, I don't know if this is a fair analogy, but like, as Muslims, we part of being Muslim is the practice of being a Muslim, right? Part of being Muslim is to strive to pray, to strive to fast, to strive to live our lives in the best way possible. And that is part and parcel of being, and again, you're never going to be the perfect Muslim. None of us are going to be the perfect Muslim, but it's always the active working. And some of that work is internal and some of that work is external. I think the same principles apply. Some of the work about fighting racism is internal and some of that work is external. But you don't get to just be like, well, you know, it doesn't really impact me, so I'm not going to really worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. And my family is fine anyway. Let me tell you, if you've never talked about racism in your family, you've got a problem. It's just how it is. You know, if you've never talked about it with your friends, you've probably got a problem, because we are all swimming in white supremacist water. We are all swimming in misogynist, patriarchal water. This stuff seeps into our norms. It informs all our biases. And so unless we are actively bringing that to the surface, interrogating it, challenging it, and also let me just add one more thing. Black murders do not happen without a basis foundation of all the little small things that happen, the small things that happen in your world, the language that gets used, the person that you don't hire, the person that you ignore in the mosque. All of these things lay the foundation so that when we go up the hierarchy of violence, when a Black person is murdered, people don't pay attention, people don't care, because you spent a whole life dehumanizing people from those communities. And so when it comes to terms like allyship, or when it comes to terms like inclusion, I get people feeling like this is a good thing for me to do. But again, if we think about what inclusion means, it means I'm part of the inside and I'm going to bring you in and I'm going to include you. That's not how, excuse me? I don't need you to include me into your club. I need you to dismantle the walls of this club so that we are all on an equal playing field. And actually, it's your house that you need to dismantle. It's not my job. I'm just, through the kindness of my heart, alhamdulillah, I'm going to help you out a little bit, but it's not my responsibility.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with, the conversation around allyship, that, when we talk about being an ally, and I want to say, the idea of allyship, I think the word is limiting, and what it's become is limiting, but the intention of it is not being played out as it should. So the intention of it is, how do we work together towards community, towards, dismantling these systems of oppression? How do we build together? How do we reimagine and create an equitable future? However, what's actually happening is that people are sort of compartmentalizing the work. They're doing it in certain spaces, but not in their intimate, private spaces. They're calling out conversations and harmful behavior and racist instances when they feel like it's comfortable for them, right? So people are not actually giving up much. They're not getting uncomfortable, and they're fearing losing that security that they have within their life, whether it's their job, whether it's whatever it is. The truth of this work is that you are going to have to give up your privilege. You are going to have to take risks, right? And I had an example in my own life where right after the everything happened with back in June with George Floyd being murdered, and everything that happened afterwards, Black Lives Matter movement starting to proliferate around the world. No one was talking about it in my workplace. I work in the social service industry. We work with newcomers, many of whom are, from the Nigerian community. No one said a word. I had to be the one to bring up the only Black person that works in the entire organization, had to be the one to bring it up, right? And what does that do? Thinking about why should the person that is most affected in terms of community trauma, in terms of, having to heal now from this being a very real reality in your personal life, why is that person experiencing the oppression the one to have to extend their emotional labor to educate, to discuss, that gets in the way of healing, right? So even just, and speaking up is not enough. We should do more than that. But even this, we're at the level of people are not even willing to talk about it in workplaces because they feel uncomfortable. They feel like, well, I'm just going to do my accounting. I'm just going to do my engineering. I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to start these conversations because, I can just get away with it. I can just do my job and go home and post a black box on Instagram and say that I did my job. If you're doing something that is the safest possible thing, which is social media solidarity. I'm sorry, but symbolic solidarity is not to say it's not useful. It has its purpose. But if that's all you're doing, then you're not really doing anything, because what that affords you to post a black box on Instagram or to hashtag Black Lives Matter, what that affords you is a social currency of being a good person, right? It's that performance of good allyship where allyship has gone wrong. Oh, I'll show up to the event. I'll maybe donate some money here and there. I will make a post on social media. Yeah, that's very easy for you to do, actually. And you're not actually risking anything, right? You are not putting yourself on a front line. You are actually doing something that might afford you privilege, even more privilege on top of the privilege you have. So when we're talking about integrating that action of black boxes, it's about also looking at the fact that being an ally has also become a form of social currency. And if you are not the one that is the target, and then you are actually doing something that might afford you even more privilege down the line. And that's where we're at. So thinking about what's happening, the police brutality in our communities, the constant Black death, that's why we say Black Lives Matter. Ask yourself, how are they getting away with it? Well, you are actually complicit. You're complicit in that, right? Because it's not just a few bad apples. Systems don't dismantle by themselves, and they're not created and perpetuated in a vacuum. They're created and perpetuated by the silences that surround them and the people that hold them up. If you are not one of the people that's actively holding them up, then you are the person that's holding it up with your silence, right? So we need to start thinking on those terms.
100%. Like if every single person refused to go to work until the police defunded themselves and until systems of criminal justice were fundamentally overhauled, that would get done, right? But everyone goes to work and continues to live their life, and therefore allows things to happen. And I wanted to build on this idea of performative allyship, because I think, again, if we think about the Muslim context, it's like only praying when people are watching and only giving zakat when somebody's like, oh, and you're like, yeah, just, whole qurban, just whatever. And then you go home and you beat your wife up, and then you go home and you do all these, and you like treat your children terribly, and you don't live life by the values that you say that you do. And Allah knows. And Allah's going to ask you on the day of judgment, all of this injustice was happening outside. What did you do about it? Are you going to say, I posted a black square? Is that going to be your answer? Oh, I gave you this house and this money and this security and this safety. What did you do with it? For your Black brothers and sisters, for this ummah that you claim to be a part of, Allah's going to ask you. And if the only thing that you did was stuff that gave you social currency and got you reward in this life, you're not going to get a reward in the afterlife. I mean, yes, do it for us, but also, like, you're a Muslim, do it for yourself.
Yeah. I want to also address something quickly and yes to everything you said. And one thing that I'm noticing is, sometimes people will say, oh, well, I asked my friend who's a Black person and they feel differently than you, or they say that I should do X, Y, and Z, right? It's this deferring to individuals who may have a different opinion and then letting that individual lead your critical consciousness. We are people who are supposed to reflect. In the Quran, it says many times, this is a religion, this is a deen for people who reflect. So tap into your critical consciousness too, to understand truth from falsehood, because you cannot tokenize Black people. We are not a monolith. Not everyone believes the same thing politically, ideologically, spiritually, whatever it is. You cannot ask one Black person who's like your best friend who has maybe internalized some anti-Blackness and use that as your guiding compass to what you're actually going to do. That's not good enough. And that's another cop-out, right? That's another way that people are evading their responsibility to be accountable and to act, is by saying, well, that's this one person. So there is such a thing as internalizing some of the harmful messages about us as Black people. And some Black people will not agree with some of the things we have to say about liberation and that kind of thing. But do your own thinking, do your own research, and know that is your responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I agree with what my sisters are saying, of course. And I want to build on a couple of the concepts. When I'm talking about racism, I usually say, because I understand that it is it's embedded in people's ideology before they're 5 years old. So yes, even Black people absorb some of those notions of anti-Black, because we live in a society that is based on white supremacy. So because of internalized anti-Black racism, it doesn't make sense to talk to somebody and say, because they're Black and they said this. The question that you need to ask your Black friend or your Black family member or whomever you're discussing with is, are you somebody who knows about anti-Black racism? Because just because you have a heart doesn't mean that you're a cardiologist, okay? And just because you have Black skin doesn't mean that you're an expert in anti-Black racism, or that you've even read one thing about it, or that you even know anything about it. And in the same way that you would not lie down for somebody to perform surgery because they have a heart, you'd probably want to know that they have a little bit more than that going on insofar as cardiology studies go, right? So don't just think, oh, Black people are experts on anti-Black racism. Just like Muslims are not on the minbar, just because they're Muslims doesn't mean that they know anything about Islam. They're going to go do a khutbah. No, not necessarily, okay? And so the other thing I want to talk about is the myth of innocence. Non-Black people purport to be innocent about anti-Black racism. That is not true. It is not true. If you sit silent in your room and close your eyes for 5 minutes, you will recall something you saw, something that you read, something that you did, something that you thought that was exactly illustrative of anti-Black racism. And if you sit for 6 minutes, you will recall 2 more. And you will continue to unpack the history of your life where you have witnessed anti-Black racism and turned your eye, turned your head, closed your mind to it. So please do not keep calling upon Black people to tell you stories that soothe your soul because they have internalized anti-Black racism and they purport that it's not that big a deal, or to actually teach you because they're experts in the field of anti-Black racism, because you already know. You have to, you already know, because it's in the air and it's in the water and you've been living here and you've been breathing here. And so you already know. And this myth of innocence and this thing about, I need, 3 years to study this. No, you don't. Close your eyes for 5 minutes. Reflect on how you've seen this going on, how you've done this yourself, right? You already know. Then I want to talk about how it is that you choose not to respond because, of course, of your hierarchical placement vis-a-vis white supremacy, right? For as long as you are supreme over at least Black people, it affords you the privilege of that. And so you might be afraid to dismantle the system of white supremacy because then you'd be living in the meritocracy that you purport to be living in. Of course, you're not living in a meritocracy. We don't have a meritocracy. We have a system that's based on white supremacy that affords non-Black people hierarchically different levels of privilege. And for as long as you're benefiting to one iota, you want that privilege. If you were actually living in a meritocracy, you'd actually have to do the work of qualifying for that job. You'd actually have to do the work of displaying good behavior to be assumed to be of good behavior, right? And so that's what you're running away from. That's what I'd like to leave you with on that one.
I think those are all excellent points and a perfect segue into my next question, given we about, a little over 10 minutes left. Let's magically say we have convinced our viewers that they will check their privilege, that they will be beyond allies, right, and work towards being active anti-racist. What are some resources that each of you recommend for each individual person to start doing their own homework, right? And not tapping into their one Black friend for all things Black, the Black expertise, right? And, but more importantly, taking that ownership and responsibility to do the work that they need to do. So what are some guiding points, some resources, some books, anything y'all have to recommend to our viewers?
So one thing I will say is that, like, if you've never engaged in any of this, in any of the anti-Black movement or in any of this space, it's like exercise, or it's like if somebody's becoming a new Muslim, like you can give them the whole Quran and be like, go learn the whole thing. Or you can be like, run 5 kilometers a day. Or you can say, listen, you are at the beginning of a lifelong journey, right? So I'm going to get you to start small. I'm going to get you to like read maybe one foundational book. And I'm sure we can, like, there's so many. Or I'm going to actually get you just to say for the next month, only consume art and books and culture and everything, just consume Black creators, for example. Or go and find one Muslim person who's not Bilal. Like, I want you to start small. And then what I also want you to do is show up. So I want you to commit to having, maybe it's one conversation a week about this topic with your family or your colleagues. Or I want you to, if you're in a position of power in your organization, I want you to make sure that every single, are you hiring Black people? Are you promoting Black people? I want you to start to bring all of this stuff into every aspect of your life, because this isn't just about work. This isn't just about the mosque. This isn't just about, it is about all of it. So identify how you can actually show up and then commit to it. And then once you've got that down, then go to the next step, then go to the next step, and then it'll become part of your life. But in June, every single person I knew who hadn't engaged in this stuff before bought 10 books on anti-racism. And most of them haven't even been picked up from the bookshop. Do you know what I mean? Like, people were like, yeah, I've got this, I'm on this, and they overwhelm themselves and they're like, you know what? I'm just going to go back to my old life because that was easier. So I want you to see this as the beginning of a journey and to try to make it as sustainable as possible.
I think, Akila, you can go. Okay, I'll go. I think building on that, you need to know that this is a lifelong journey, that, working towards liberation, you may not see it in your lifetime. It may get frustrating, especially if you really delve into this work in a meaningful, anti-racist and continual way. But know that you, first of all, are not alone. There are many people, and you need to connect with community. You need to connect with those people doing the work. You can't do this in a vacuum. Yes, you need to read. Yes, you need to listen. You need to watch whatever it is, documentaries, etc. But the work is not just you being alone in your room and studying. Part of it is that, but then another part of it is connecting with the already existing movements and communities and institutions that exist, that are actively and have been actively doing the work. We need to have a certain level of humility when we start these journeys, to know that just because you read so-and-so's book, or you read the whole catalog, or, I sent you Black Islam syllabus and you went through the whole thing, you're not an expert, and you never will be unless, you know, you have lived experience. So if you are trying to connect with this work, you need to also connect with actual people that are doing this work and defer to their expertise as well, if they have expertise in this area. And know that there's already lots going on. I know in Toronto, we have the Black Muslim Initiative that's continuing to do this work. We've got a ton of scholars, you know, that you can connect with, including Imam Yassin Dwyer and, you know, Sheikh, sorry if I'm messing up names, but oh man, I'm blanking on names, but there are a ton of people, and I can send a list. Maybe Yasmin, if you have any resources in Australia, I'd love to connect with some people there. But know that this work is continuous, and that we're building community at the same time. So really be aware that it will get frustrating, and you need to prepare yourself for that discomfort, because I think what happened back in June and, you know, throughout the summer, and the reason why people tapered off, the reason why people got really excited, I think, again, there were good intentions attached to that action, but the follow-up didn't happen because people got depressed. I honestly think that's what happened. People got sad, they got frustrated. They were like, this stuff is really sad and heavy. Well, imagine if you were Black, right? Yes, it is. But imagine having to live it, right? So really understanding that it's also a privilege that you have to be able to tap out when you want to. So tapping back in consistently is your responsibility, and it's a spiritual responsibility, as well as just a civic one. So yeah, keeping that in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Tamaj, that and Yasmin. I absolutely agree. What I'd also like to say is, yeah, I'm not really saying a list of things. There are too many podcasts, too many books, too many movies, so many of everything. And I know that everybody has a good friend, a best friend named Google. Everybody has a best friend named Google, right? So if you really want to learn, I know you will. And I actually have a list of books and things that I was going to suggest, but I'm actually not going to. And the reason why I'm not going to is because I believe that if you want it, you will get it. And I believe that effort is what's going to really make it yours. It's going to really mean that you did it. Anything that you tap into from your good friend Google will lead you to another link, and it's all connected. And so, you know, you can do this while you're driving your car, listen to a podcast, you can do whatever. There's so many different methods of entering into these ways of knowing, but remember that you already knew, you already saw this, but you need to get a little bit more polish on the root knowledge that you have from your own experience of witnessing, of perpetuating, of participating in, of turning away from the knowledge of anti-Black racism, and as it intersects with Islamophobia in your own lives, okay? So I leave the resources to you. What I will say is that you were born free of this foolishness. You were born brilliant. You were born with the knowledge that people are phenomenal, and you judged people based on the energy that they brought to you as they interacted with you in your tiny self. You felt joy or you felt fear based on the energy that the people brought to you and what they did to you. The people who smiled and spoke to you in soft tones, you liked that, right? And then you were taught that no, people are to be evaluated based on the level of pigment in their skin, even though they are 99.9% biologically similar to you. These are the people to avoid. These are the people to adore. Yeah, you were taught that before you were 5 years old, around 4 or 5 years old, right? And you ran with that, and that misinformation, that lie that you were taught, and you continue to believe. That's what you need to work on unseating, because we are beautiful and we are brilliant. We are phenomenal, and you don't know that. You thought we were less than that. We are good. We are trustworthy. We matter. We matter in ways that improve your life every single day. The reason why you have a stoplight is because a Black man invented that. The reason why you have an elevator is because a Black man, phenomenal as we are, invented that. We are so phenomenal. We are so prolific in our intelligence and in our inventions and in our contributions to this world. But you turn away from knowing that, even as you use these things to facilitate your wellness and ease. And that's what you need to get back to understanding, like how you did when you were little, before the foolishness that you were taught and actually believed. You need to get back to what Allah made you and deconstruct what human beings taught you. Live back in your spirit of who you were born to be and what Allah intended for you, and move away from this belief in the newly socially constructed concept of race and its hierarchical leveling of human beings.
Thank you so much, Sister Akila. I had prepared a short ending, and I'm not going to even say anymore because of how beautifully you brought that circle back. And I just want everyone to reflect on that and to simmer on that, because there's so many things to walk away for, and just solely want to be here as an echo to what everyone said, that this is not, this is everybody's job. Everyone is capable of doing this, whether you're a student, whether you are, you are at work, whether in your masajid, there is enough of anti-racism work to go around, and that you don't need to be the expert, and that you do not need to be the person who's consistently having these conversations. Yes, I think the importance is to start at home, right? What self conversations are you having? How are you being critical? What are your intentions, right? Like we said in Islam, al-a'malu bin-niyat. Are you doing it for the social currency and to be woke? Are you doing it because you genuinely believe in the Islamic concepts of social justice and wanting to get better, and doing it in your smaller circles, right? And coming out. And I think I say this as a reminder to myself and other non-Black Muslims of the importance of passing the mic when applicable, right? And the importance of stepping back when applicable, and the importance of taking ownership and speaking yourself, right? And there are professionals who do this work. So pay them, hire them, put in that money, right? There are people who are trained with the skills to do, as you all can see here. And there will be times where it's going to be up to us to speak up in those spaces. And I think these are some incredible takeaways of an amazing 2 hours. Again, I think we could continue to talk about this for days, but again, reflects the larger theme of this being a continuous journey. So my sincere thanks to all of you here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in your work and keep you steadfast and safe and healthy in all that you do. I'm so immensely honored to have been in all of your company. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. You can get in contact with any of us here. I'm sure Oya will put out the contact information of folks. I thank you all for your time and your patience and taking all of our questions. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sumaya to help us part ways.
Thank you very much. I had also prepared an ending, and then I have decided to abandon it. Thank you very much for that amazing, insightful discussion. I definitely feel better informed, and I will do my very best to think critically and doing what I can to check my privilege and use my power more effectively. The organization relies on donations to present quality programs such as this. At the moment, our fundraising efforts are reduced as our normal methods are not available to us. We are accepting donations through our website, www.islamiclearning.org. You can also contact us there, and we feel free to ask any questions you have about this event or any other. Tax receipts will be available to Canadian residents for any amount over $25. So that brings us to the end. Thank you firstly to our panel for that discussion and to our audience for listening and engaging. I wish you all a good rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Assalamu alaikum.